sexual immorality, whether a person is walking by the flesh or walking by the Spirit. Just as Paul told these individuals in, verse 9, I believe it is, of 1 Corinthians 6, he says, you've been justified, you've been sanctified, you've been set apart. In other words, don't go back and live that way. You change your thinking on this, your attitude on this, because, your actions has changed. You need to change your attitude about it too, or you're going to go right back into that situation. And that's what he was dealing with. Of course, as he goes through, we see that he's answering questions that the Corinthian church has asked, but we only have Paul's answers. We don't have the questions. It's like listening to a phone call on one side. You only hear one version of it, but you can get the gist of what's being said based on the answers that's given. But that's the reason I wanted us to start in 1 Corinthians 6 is, again, how a person views when it comes to immorality. We got to verse 18 last week, and it says, flee sexual immorality. Every sin that a man does is outside the body, but he who commits sexual immorality sins against his own body. Here's where Paul starts making the argument that you need to protect yourself, because when you're dealing with sexual immorality, you're dealing with something that's very dangerous. You're dealing with something that's very different. I guess that's the right way to say it. Very different in the realm of sin. Because of what it affects and what can happen. When you think about that, and you think about how Paul described it, I want us to look. I found something that someone was talking about this very situation, and they used some verses from Proverbs, and I thought it was very appropriate here. I want us to look in Proverbs chapter 5. Notice what Solomon, what he says when he's instructing, because here's the thing. Here's another reason to think about this. As parents, you really need to be we need to be teaching our children this. And I have to be the first to admit, I didn't do a good job with this. It was more, don't do this, instead of don't do this and here is why. More of the explaining part of it. The more of telling them, here's how everything is laid out. Here's the purpose behind how God has designed something. And that's what Paul is dealing with here. He's explaining it. But notice in Proverbs here, notice the language. It says, my son, pay attention to my wisdom. Lend your ear to my understanding, that you may preserve discretion, and your lips may keep knowledge. For the lips of an immoral woman drip honey, and her mouth is smoother than oil. But in the end she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps lay hold of hell, lest you ponder her path of life. Her ways are unstable, you do not know them. Therefore hear me now, my children. Do not depart from the words of my mouth. Remove your way far from her, and do not go near the door of her house, lest you give your honor to others and your ears to the cruel one. Lest aliens be filled with your wealth, and your labors go to the house of a foreigner, and you mourn at last. When your flesh and your body are consumed, and say, how have I hated instruction, and my heart despised correction. I have not obeyed the voice of my teachers, nor inclined my ear to those who instructed me. I was on the verge of total ruin, in the midst of assembly and congregation. Drink water from your own citron, running water from your own well. Should your fountains be dispersed abroad, streams of water in the streets? Let them be only your own, not for strangers with you. Let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice with a wife of your youth. As a loving deer and a graceful doe, let her breast satisfy you at all times, and always be enraptured with her love. For why should you, my son, be enraptured by an immoral woman, be embraced in the arms of a seductress? For the ways of man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all his paths. His own iniquities entrap the wicked man, and he is caught in the cords of his sin. He shall die for lack of instruction, and in the greatness of his folly he shall go astray. Notice in Proverbs chapter 6, beginning at verse 20. My son, keep your father's command. Do not forsake the law of your mother. Bind them continually upon your heart. Tie them around your neck. When you roam, they will lead you. When you sleep, they will keep you. When you awake, they will speak with you. For the commandment is a lamp and the law of light. Reproofs of instruction are the way of life, to keep you from the evil woman, from the flattering tongue of a seductress. Do not lust after her beauty in your heart, nor let her allure you with her eyelids. For by means of a harlot a man is reduced to a crust of bread. An adulteress will prey upon his precious life. Can a man take fire to his bosom and his clothes not be burned? Can one walk on hot coals and his feet not be seared? So he who goes to his neighbor's wife, whoever touches her, shall not be innocent. People do not despise a thief if he steals to satisfy himself when he is starving. Yet when he is found, he must restore sevenfold. He may have to give up all the substance of his house. Whoever commits adultery with a woman lacks understanding. He who does so destroys his own soul. Wounds and dishonor he will get, and his reproach will not be wiped away. For jealousy is a husband's fury. Therefore he will not spare in the day of vengeance. He will accept no recompense, nor will he be appeased, though you give him many gifts. Now think about, you don't see him writing about any other sin like this. And when Paul was talking about fleeing sexual immorality, and we talk about you need to put up these boundaries to make sure that you're not tempted. Satan's out there is trying to tempt individuals as much as he can. And notice what Solomon said. Here's what you do. You can't carry fire and not burn your clothes. You can't walk on fire, walk on coals, and not burn your feet. What's he saying about that? Don't do it. Don't even get close. You can't carry fire and not get burned. So don't think you can get just as close to temptation as you can get and not give in to it. He said, don't do that. He said, here's why it's devastating. You can take a man that goes steal food because he's hungry. People will understand that he does that because he's hungry, and you got to repay sevenfold. You make restitution for that. He said, you go out and commit sexual immorality or infidelity. You go to another man's wife. He said, you know what's going to happen there? Nothing you can do is going to make that husband happy. All he's going to be thinking about is vengeance. That's what he's talking about. This is a dangerous situation. It's something that's not just haphazard to think about. And as Paul describes, fleeing from this is why he says, before you can get in and think about marriage, you've got to think of it on these terms. As he said before, it's not just about fleshly desire. It's not like the Corinthians think it is. It's, I'm hungry, I'm going to eat. I have this sexual desire, that's what I'm going to do. It's just a fleshly thing. It doesn't matter. It absolutely matters. That's what Paul is trying to tell them. It matters. Think about it. And as I said, as parents, that's what we need to be telling our children. It's not just, don't do it. Don't do it. We can hammer that in good. Don't do it. Don't be around it. Don't put yourself in those positions. As parents, we do all that we can to make sure our children aren't put in those situations. But do we ever explain to them why? Do we ever say, this is why? This is how God intends this to be. This is what He's preparing you for. This is what needs to happen. This is the progression of it. It's not that sexual desire is wrong. Don't ever go to your kids and say, you shouldn't have that sexual desire. That's wrong. It's about what's the place for it. What's it designed for? And that's what Paul goes in and going to describe. Look at verse 19. Eventually we're going to get to chapter 7, I believe, but we're getting there. He says, or do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God, and you are not your own? There again, he's talking about, it's not about who you are. When you start thinking about what our body is for, the Bible talks about God dwelling in us, the Spirit dwelling in us, Jesus dwelling in us. But he also says sin can dwell in us. That's what he goes into in Romans chapter 8. How does all this do this? It does it by us living through the word of, this is how this light is directing me. I'm walking in the light as He is in the light. We have fellowship one with another. Blood of Jesus Christ continues to cleanse me. I'm producing the fruit of the Spirit because I'm walking in the Spirit. Paul says if we're walking in the flesh and we're walking carnally, we're saying, this is my body, I can do whatever I want to do. And when we have that attitude, that's why you have abortions, that's why you have sexual immorality, that's why you have all these, because people say, it's my body, I'll do with it what I want to do. The Bible says it's not. It's God's. God is directing us. We're supposed to walk in the Spirit, not walk in the flesh. And that's what Paul is directing them to do. And I'm just kind of simplifying it so we can get into chapter 7. Now, look what he says in chapter 7, verse 1. Any questions thus far? I just kind of recapped a little bit of what we talked about last week. Don't look at Mike. He don't have a question yet. So he's getting there. He's getting there. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 1. He says, now concerning the things of which you wrote to me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. So what are we seeing here? We're seeing two different extremes. And we're going to have to let Paul say all that he's going to say, because here's where some false doctrine starts coming in. Here's where celibacy throughout life is more spiritual than being married and having those sexual relations. They start by things they say Paul is saying when he's not actually saying these things. But notice what he's going to deal with here. He's dealing with two different extremes. One extreme is what he's already been dealing with. That it's just a fleshly thing. It's just a fleshly desire. You got to eat. You have this sexual desire, fulfill it. It doesn't matter. It's just a flesh. So you have that extreme. And they go to extremes just like we still go to extremes on everything else today. That's why you have these terms, liberalism and conservatism and legalism and these, because we'll go to one extreme to the other instead of staying exactly where the Bible is, right down the middle. Paul here is dealing with two different extremes. One of them is it's just a fleshly thing. The other is, okay, we're married, but isn't it better just not to touch a woman? And by this, it's a euphemism for sexual relations, of course, as we're going to see. It's like, okay, we just don't touch a woman. And notice how he answers this. Now, concerning the things of which you wrote me, it's good for a man not to touch a woman. Paul can't be saying, he can't be saying, the text doesn't allow him to say that you have to live a celibate life. Don't ever get married, live a celibate life. If he does, there's several problems with that. One is he going against God's instruction for marriage and institution of marriage all the way back from Genesis? What is it first? When God created everything, He created man, everything was good except one thing. What was it? One thing He looked and says it's not good. What's that?
Adam was alone.
Yeah, Adam was alone. It's not good that man should be alone. So He said, what should a man do? A man should... you shall leave father and mother, be clean to your spouse, and the two shall become one. And then he told those two to do what? Be fruitful and multiply. Is Paul going against what God said? Is Paul going against and say, you shouldn't, it's good that you don't touch a woman? Well, one, he's not going to go against what God instituted. And two, where would that leave the human race? If a man never touched a woman again, wouldn't be anybody. I mean, I'm not a biology teacher, but I can figure that out. So he can't be saying that. We're going to go in and see why. But notice what he is dealing with here. If you look in verse 2, nevertheless, because of sexual immorality, let each man have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. Okay, he says... First, he says, of what you wrote to me, it's good to not touch, for a man not to touch a woman. So we have to decide, is Paul saying that? Or is he saying, here's what you wrote me, that it's not good to do that? I think it's the latter. It's not good that they wrote him. It's not good to do that. They're going from one extreme to the other. And Paul said, because of sexual immorality, and we're going to see as he goes in and explains this, because of that desire, because individuals can't control that desire, a man should have his own wife, and a woman should have her own husband. Now, there's several things we can go into here when it comes to polygamy, when it comes to homosexuality. I think this kind of does away with that, as Paul was describing it here. But two, he says, here's because there are some that can't control that sexual desire, which sexual desire isn't wrong, and he's going to go in and talk about some have a gift, and that's what he's talking about himself. Some's able to do that, but some aren't. But by the same token, he's not saying just get married because you can't control your sexual desires. That's not the purpose, the only purpose of marriage. But Paul is dealing with what they are giving him. They're going from one extreme to the other, and they're thinking that, okay, sex is just sex, or sex is evil, and we shouldn't touch a woman. Well, Paul is dealing with both of them. Well, one, it's not just a fleshly thing. It's not just that. There's a lot more to it than that, and change your attitude and thinking of that. And the other, it's not an evil thing. So marriage is not a necessary evil. It is what he's going in and talking about. He said, nevertheless, because of sexual immorality. Now, if we just stopped here, a person might think that. But Paul goes on from things that he says. Let's go on down to verses 3 and 4, and we'll kind of back up just a little bit. Let the husband render to his wife the affection due to her, and likewise also the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. So he's going to start going in here. Let's just go maybe one more and we'll back up to get the whole picture here. I don't want to get just part of it. Verse 5 and 6. Do not deprive one another except for consent for a time, that you may give yourself to fasting and prayer. Come together again so that Satan does not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. But I say this as a concession, not a command. Verse 7. For I wish that all men were even as I myself, but each one has his own gift from God, one in this manner and the other in that. So what is Paul saying in this whole thing here? He's saying, okay, what you wrote to me, it's good that a woman shouldn't touch a man. I'm saying because of sexual immorality, each woman have her own husband, each man have his own wife, and then he goes into what their duties are. Again, he's not talking about that marriage, that sexual immorality is wrong, or that you should remain unmarried. He's saying there's some that's able to do it. He said, I wish some was like me, but some have a gift of one thing and some of another. It's just like any other temptation. Some can overcome things pretty easy, some can't. So there are some that sexual desire isn't strong enough where they feel like they ever need to get married. They're content like they are. I don't think Paul is condemning marriage or that, either one. He's saying himself that this is where some in the Catholics and priests and all that get to where Paul said it's better, you're more spiritual if you remain as he was unmarried. Well, he's going to go in and talk about toward the end of the chapter why it may be better because of the present distress. But as he's talking about here, we have to keep in the context of what he's actually talking about. He's talking about because sexual immorality is so rampant, don't go to one extreme or the other, that desire that individuals have, then each person should have their own husband or each one have their own wife, or remain as he is, if they can control that sexual desire. He says don't go to one extreme or the other, and sex isn't an evil thing. Marriage isn't just a necessary evil. You have to look, as Paul says, if we look back, if we go to verses 3 and 4, notice this is a liberating, especially for the time, it's a liberating thing that Paul says. Let the husband render to his wife the affection due to her, and likewise also the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. You think about, especially in that time, what do you think it was like for a woman? Did she have any authority? If she was married, what did she basically have to do? Whatever her husband said, wouldn't it? He had total control over everything. But what's Paul saying? The husband does have, the wife's body is his, but the husband's body is the wife's also. It's a two-way thing here. They become one. So it's given the wife authority also when it comes to this. Something they didn't have before. So this is going to be new to them too. So as Paul is putting together, he's talking at that sexual desire is designed for a reason. It's designed to be used in marriage when a person has their own wife. Remember when I said in the beginning that when people say, oh, it's my body, I can do what I want to. It's not. It's God's and your spouse if you choose to get married. That's whose body it is. And what are we presenting to both? That's what Paul is saying here. What are we presenting to them? How do we view that? It's something that's special. And it's something that is special between a husband and wife. When you think about dating, that's what you've got to, I think we need to instill in our children too. And there can be 2 or 3 lessons just on this. What's the purpose of dating? What is the purpose of dating? Anybody know? To have all the fun you can have? For what reason? To do what? Why do you want to get married? What do you want to know him for? To get married. Is there any other reason to? You're going to marry a person that you're dating, right? Somewhere or another. It's not just to sow you wild oats. It's not. The purpose is you're going to find a mate. You're trying to get what the old phrase used to call it, courting. Is that what it was, Mike? That's what you do, ain't it? Court. I think it's what it is. It's for a purpose. Parents today are just teaching the kids, oh, go out and have fun, sow your wild oats, do all that you can do before you get married. Well, that attitude, where does that go into? That goes into the marriage, doesn't it? And they got that kind of attitude to where the commitment's not going to be there. The love, as far as the commitment, won't be there. It might be lust for a little while, but that's all that it's probably going to be if the attitude doesn't change. And that's what he was talking to the Corinthians about. You've been sanctified. You've been justified. You've been set apart. You live that way, but now you have done something that you're a different person. Remember, when we become a child of God, we rise to do what? Walk in newness of life. We're a new person, right? So he says, don't go back to that. And that's why we need to be teaching our children, don't be there to start with. But he's dealing, just like he's dealing with Corinthians, just like individuals deal today. He says, here's what you are. You chose to become a child of God. You're his. You're not yours anymore. You're his. And he's for you. He directs what your steps should be. We walk by the Spirit. We don't walk by the flesh anymore. Those sexual desires are there for a reason. And he goes in and describes what that desire looks like and what it looks like in a marriage. It's not the wife's body anymore. It's not the husband's. He's to give to her and she's to give to him. And not to refuse, as he says, unless there's a time that you set apart for a reason. But notice what he says with that. There's not a take in that, is there? It's a give. It's not a take. It's not a demand. And what I mean by that, I think here's a good time to say this. It's not about just demanding. A spouse may say, okay, Paul says that I can't refuse, that I'm to give, right? Well, what if it comes a time someone says, well, I just don't feel good today. But because of what Paul says, that's not going to matter. I've got to feel that desire for my spouse. Could be the line of thinking. But what the spouse should be thinking in the giving is, okay, that's not my own. They don't feel good. I'm not going to demand. Does that make sense? And here's why. You can say you have all these together. It's just one. The wife is not her body. The husband's not her body. But when you think about how Paul describes marriage, especially go back to look in Ephesians, when he describes marriage, how a husband is to treat his spouse. You go to treat his wife, and you look and see how he says in Ephesians, a wife is to treat her husband. It's a representation of what? Christ in the church, isn't it? You go to 1 Corinthians 13 and everything that it says about love. So if I truly love my spouse, guess what I'm not going to be? Can you pull 1 Corinthians without messing up the other verses I gave you? 1 Corinthians 13. Sorry, that just popped in my head, but I think it proves the point here. Start with love. What is it? Verse 4 through 8. Where he describes what love is.
Yeah, love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself. Love is not puffed up. Go on, verse 5. Yeah, love suffers long and kind. Love does not parade itself. Love is not puffed up. Does not behave rudely. Does not seek its own. What's that mean? It's not selfish. It's not provoked. It doesn't think evil. Does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. Bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. Love never fails. So you have to put these things in context with the sum of God's word is truth. So you take what Paul's saying about that relationship between the husband and wife, that the husband render to the wife the affection due to her, verses 3 and 4. Likewise also the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. You take that in conjunction with what love is, and you take that in conjunction as Paul describes what marriage is in Ephesians, and you put those together, it's going to be a give relationship, not a take relationship, not a demand relationship, but it's a give relationship. But by the same token, when it comes to maybe refusing, I had a lady one time, her and her husband were having trouble. He didn't commit adultery, he almost did. So they came to me for some counseling. As I was talking to them, her exact words were, I refused him any kind of relations to try to make him commit adultery so I could divorce him. You see why Paul would have to say something like this? Why the scriptures would? My words to her was, you already put your marriage asunder by doing that. You're guilty also. We can't do that. It can't be, I'm going to deny out of spite or out of these kind of things. Paul said, you're one together. It's not your body to refuse, husband or wife, but it's a give thing. It's not a take thing. It's not a demand thing. And that's about as easy as I can describe that without getting more uncomfortable than I want to. But go ahead, Jerry.
Well, not to disagree with you, but I feel like it is a give and a take. And some people take more than they give, and there's got to be a compromise.
Where would it be a take? And I could be wrong, but
Take when you have someone in the relationship that's just incapable of doing the majority of the work of keeping the marriage together.
yeah.
And then one person picks up the slack of that, and then
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't believe marriage is 50-50. I think sometimes it's 90-10 on either side sometimes. Yeah.
it's working too good if it's 90-10, but
Well, I mean, you take, I have a bad day. I'm not feeling good. I'm grumpy. I'm sick. I can't function. Is my wife going to take probably most of the load of that marriage until I feel better? Say I've got the flu. I can't get out of bed. There's a lot that I won't be able to do as a husband. Does she have to take the slack? That could be a 90-10 day, you know. Now, I don't think it ought to be all the time. I think the marriage is in trouble if it's all the time. But I'm saying it's not. I don't think we could ever say as a husband and wife, I'm going 50% of the way and I'm not going any farther. It's up to you to come the other 50. I think the marriage is in trouble when it comes to that. And I'm not disagreeing with you as far as take on that concept. I'm just going to say it. I don't think Paul is saying I can demand a sexual relationship if there's some reason my wife isn't up to that. Is that an easy way to say that? I think it's a give and a take. I think if I have love, like Paul says, and I have my marriage like he says in Ephesians, that it's going to be, I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to go in there, you got the flu? I don't care. Doesn't matter to me. I've got a desire. And I'm not trying to make light of this, but it can't be that, can it? You know, it can't be that kind of take thing. There has to be a giving. It's a giving relationship. It's not a take. That's what I mean by that.
Well, in my head, I'm just running through some of the people I see that has these medical conditions that, once in their life they were in great shape, and then something happened, a wreck or whatever, and they're half the person they used to be.
Right.
And the marriage is different.
I tell you, that's one thing. I use this when I'm doing premarital counseling, and I tell you something else I always use. I go through marriage vows. rich or poor, sickness and health, all these. I say you got married in a church building, you leave, pull out there on 56, a car T-bones you, and your spouse is paralyzed. You hadn't been married 10 minutes. What does that do to your relationship? Love is more that. Love is you made a choice through sickness and in health. That would be a tough sickness part, I guess. But what about health? I've seen marriages destroyed because one got real healthy in the gym and decided they didn't need their spouse anymore. So there's your healthy. Richer for poor. Well, if they lose everything, or what if all of a sudden they inherited $2 million and the husband comes home and said, pack your bags, we got $2 million. She said, where are you going? I don't care as long as you're out in the dark. What if it's a situation like that? Anything could happen that comes up in a marriage. And did y'all get that joke, by the way? Anything could happen. But because love is not just an emotion. Love is a choice that you make. I choose to love this person even through those hard times, even when I'm having to pull 90% because something happened and my spouse can't. You see what I'm saying? Now, if we're both fine and I make a decision, like I said that one lady did, there's where you start getting that issues. But you got another issue too where you come in and it's just this overpowering, demanding, I don't care what's going on, I demand this, and you have to because that's what Paul said. I had a lady tell me that one time too. I took a deacon with me, and the husband said, you tell my wife that she has to do this because the Bible says she has to. So I don't have to tell her she has to do anything, We can take, as Paul was dealing with here, we can take them to extremes. The point I'm trying to get across here is, it's if our marriage is on the whole of what God says it should be, not just what Paul says in this section, what Paul says in Corinthians, what Paul says in Ephesians, what Jesus says about the husband and wife in Matthew 19, what God said from the very beginning in Genesis. We're one. It's this give relationship of I want the very best for my spouse because I choose to do that. And as a spouse, I choose to show my wife that she's wanted. I choose to show my spouse that they're wanted. I choose to do this for them so they won't want to look somewhere else and say, oh, I want to feel wanted by this or that. That's what my job is as a husband, isn't it? That's what my wife's role is as a spouse. That's the give there. We want, because it's not me anymore, it's her. It's not her anymore, it's me. And we can put each of us in those places. It's what that relationship should be. And that's what Paul is trying to get across. Change your thinking of what you think of when it comes to sexual immorality. You've done something to change that thinking. Now act like you've changed that thinking. Don't go from one extreme to the other. And he goes on. He says, do not deprive one another except by consent for a time that you may give yourself to fasting and prayer. And he says this is a concession, not a command. It's all right to come together and say, hey, here's what we're going to focus on. Or here's what the situation is. But he says, you can do that, but come back together so what doesn't happen? What he said that can happen if you're not careful with that. He said, come back together again so Satan does not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. He says, but I say this as a concession, not a command. He says, it's all right to do this for a little while, but you've got to remember, Satan's going to be right there. He's going to be right there to say, hey, look, they're not giving you what you need. They're not doing this. This person over here can do it. Look, they showed you some attention. They talked to you. They confided something in you. They gave you a look and made you feel a certain way. And then before you know it, your feet's getting burned because you're walking on coals, or your clothes is on fire because you're carrying fire. Isn't that what Solomon said? He said, be careful with that. Set those boundaries. And people today, it's such a selfish culture that we don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear boundaries in my marriage. I can do what I want to. My spouse does what they want to. I'll do people want to live any life they want to live selfishly and think they can be married and do that. Paul said it's not about, when you come together as one, you think differently. You set those boundaries. And it's not I don't even believe it's a trust thing. I believe it's a respect thing. I try to let my wife know what I'm doing. I try to let her know where I'm going. I try, the best of my ability, she knows about everything that I do.
Why? Is it because I think she doesn't trust me? It's because I respect her enough to tell her. You know, that's what we're talking about. That's where it comes to, it's a choice. It's not just a warm, fuzzy feeling, because then you start thinking like the Corinthians here, it's just a fleshly thing. It doesn't matter. I can leave this covenant that I've made and go over here and have this kind of, get this desire out of my system over here and then come back to this covenant and then go do it. It doesn't work that way. Paul said it's different here. And as Solomon says, it destroys that marriage. It destroys that. That's how dangerous it is. Then, of course, I think we can talk about this a little bit. Then he says, for I wish that all men were even as I myself, but each one has his own gift. I think this is why Paul ends this question with the words here. Paul wishes that all were like him. And some scholars suggest that Paul is saying that he wishes all people remain single, but I don't believe that's what he's saying here. First, if that was the case, again, where would human existence be? We wouldn't have any kids anymore. There wouldn't be. So Paul's not saying that. As we go on and read the rest of the chapter, we're going to see that, because of present distress, it's good. I mean, think about if you were being persecuted as a Christian, would you rather somebody do something to you or do something to your family? They can do something to me all they want to. You start hurting my children or my spouse, then I'm going to think differently. So being married would make you think different in that situation. But also, as Paul goes on to say, some's got a gift of, that sexual desire is not overwhelming where they feel like they got to get married. They're happy with the way they are. That's the way, at least in this context, at this time, this is the way that Paul was. But again, I think what makes more sense here is Paul saying he wishes that everyone was free from the need of sexual fulfillment like him. And this would be a gift from God and not be tempted, overwhelming, like some can be overly tempted by some situations.
King James Version says would instead of wish.
Would that? Yeah. And I think in the context he's talking, I think he does. That because he goes in and talks about widows and the virgins. Is it better for them not to marry? And he says they ought to remain like they are because of this. I think that whole context is in there. We just haven't got that far yet. Any questions, comment? This is a very serious subject. It's a problem that's prevalent in our culture, and I think it's not talked about. I don't know. I could probably count on 2 fingers the times that I've preached a lesson like this. I preached about in 1 Corinthians. I don't know that I've got this in depth in it before, but I thought about this for a lot of different reasons. I think about myself as a parent. I was a pretty no parent, stay away from this, don't be alone in these situations. And that's how I was as a preacher. I would counsel individuals that were dating and stuff, don't put yourself in that situation, don't do this, instead of here's why, because here's what God designed this for. And I think that's what we need to be teaching. And I think if that's the case, then our marriages, it may change individuals' thinking of sexual immorality. And I think if we have more discussions like this, open discussions, I think it will help the marriages. People will think different about marriage and the purpose behind it and the wonderful and beautiful thing that it could be. Any final thoughts tonight? Anything else, Jeremy? Nope. Be thinking for them next week. We'll go on down the chapter. We'll get to the 2 verses that I said eventually, probably maybe the next lesson or the lesson after.